What's going on?
Chilling, man. Thanks for coming to West Virginia.
My pleasure. What do we have here?
All right, so I asked you to come to West Virginia to then order French food, but it's like chicken and then what'd you get?
Actually, I got a BLT.
It's a French BLT.
It's a French BLT.
I don't know what the difference is. It looks pretty similar to an American BLT.
Very much so.
But it has fancy names like frites with your fries.
Ah, so yes.
It's good. But yeah, no, this is a restaurant I love. It's awesome. I'm glad you came, man. It's awesome. Thanks for asking me to be on the show.
Yeah. I've been, I remember as soon as I told you about it, I was like, hey, it's Shane.
Yeah, dude.
Come on.
You're doing your Bourdain thing. That's the way to do it.
So for people who aren't familiar with you, if you want to just
give
a quick resume.
Shane Cashman. I'm a writer at Timcast.com. I author a few books. The series, the Tales from the Inverted World series, which is like true crime, ghosts, aliens, encounters. The last book was I spent like 6 months in Georgia looking for the Confederate gold that they say went missing. I did not find any. So there's that, and then I also wrote The Fucking Lunatic and Joyless Kingdom, and yeah, and I also profile people for Timcast. I've done Kanye, Alex Jones, I think Riff Raff was the most recently, a rapper I'm quite fond of down in Florida, who wears neon all the time.
I haven't heard Riff Raff in a long time. I didn't know he was still doing, like he's still rapping or anything.
Yeah, he got kind of, we'll say Me Too'd early on, but it looks like it looks completely false. Like the lady who accused him of stuff, this is in Australia when it happened, and her whole story fell apart afterwards, but before that happened, they canceled his entire tour, and this is right as he was taking off. So he was like kind of popping for a minute because he was on, oh man, I forget that guy's name, that DJ who's pretty pop, Diplo. He was on Diplo's label. He was like doing really well. I loved him back then. Like I loved him from day one. I was like, this guy is so strange. You know, he's neat. I don't know if he's real or not. I liked it. So that kind of hurt his career, but he never stopped. I kind of fell off as a fan, as I was like, you know, what happened? I didn't follow up. So then I just happened to tweet out one day. I was like, oh no, you know what it was? I was having a bad day. I was super sad, and I needed something to lift me up. And like YouTube somehow was like, the algorithm spoke to me that day, and it said, I'm going to show you Theo Von and Riff Raff. And they seem like they're like the same person. Like they both like speak in sentences that don't seem like they should ever exist on this planet. So that lifted up my spirits. And I tweeted out, Riff Raff and Theo Von are the greatest poets alive. And Riff Raff responded. And I was just like, oh wow, can I profile you? And then I spent like 4 days at his house in Florida.
Oh wow.
It was hilarious. It was fun.
See, man, you just talked about the magic of Twitter.
Yo.
People
absolutely
underestimate it, man.
I hate it for a lot of reasons, but like I think the pros outweigh the cons. But there's a lot of cons.
There's a lot of cons.
There's a lot of cons. Like in terms of, just like yesterday, you probably saw it. The whole safety thing is back. The Twitter safety.
No, I didn't.
And they're talking about like what is safe. We're going to make it more safe for political discourse. They're going to make it more accurate. Words like that, which mean nothing to me. I mean, I know those words, but like, do you define them like I define them, right?
No.
Like, what does safe mean? So that is kind of sketchy to me, and it sounds a lot like how Twitter used to be. But on the flip side, the pros are amazing. Like the fact that I could just tweet out something that I did not expect them to respond to me at all. Theo didn't, like what the heck? But like, Riff did, and then I was like, oh wow. Like I looked at his catalog, he just never stopped. And there's so many great songs I missed. So I was like right back into it, and he'd gotten better. Like he was so much better. So yeah, that was amazing. Like the fact that I could just tweet something out super late at night after a bad day, and then in like a week, I'm in Miami at Riff Raff's house. It is nuts. It's amazing.
But it's also great that you work for someone who supports that.
Yeah, it's amazing. I have a dream job. Like I've been writing profiles for a while. I love writing profiles on people. It's my favorite way to write. Like back in the day when I was still freelancing different places, that was the thing I used to want to pitch the most. Like I just wanted to, and at that point it was like people who, like the garbage man, right? Like I liked talking to people who were, I don't want to say he's on the fringes of society, but he's kind of forgotten, the garbage man, right? Or a lady who does makeup on models, right? Or this morbidly obese antiques dealer who was like 50 and had a crazy house. He collected funeral marches that played on old cylinders. It's really bizarre. But like I love these people because they all have great stories. I love the way people talk. I love the words they choose. And they're all different ages and they have great stories. So that was what I was pitching for a while. You ever read Joseph Mitchell?
No.
You know Joseph? Okay, so Joseph Mitchell is one of my favorite writers, and he was around in New York in like the 50s, I want to say. He was a writer for the New Yorker back when it was worth reading still. And he's the guy basically who taught me about profile writing. There was also people like Gay Talese and Joan Didion that I like. But for whatever reason, Joseph Mitchell really like resonated with me. He would go talk to like, and this is the 50s, maybe even late 40s. He'd talk to the bearded lady, right? He talked to the fishmongers down on the east side of Manhattan. And these stories, like I get chills thinking of them now. Not a lot of people like reading them, I love them. It's like looking at someone paint you, right? I love that kind of stuff. So I was like, I want to just duplicate what Joseph did. He was so good at it. W.C. Hines is another guy. He'd write about boxers and racers. So yeah, at a certain point, I was just like, I'm gonna pitch this till I'm blue in the face, and like not a lot of people were into it. Shockingly, because they're like, no one knows who these people are. First of all, no one cares. But I'm like, I know, but like, that's the point. That's the point. Like, I think everyone is very interesting. It might take a while to scratch the surface on some people, but everyone's interesting. This planet is insane. Everyone's got insane stories, beautiful stories, hurtful stories if you listen long enough. So yeah, I started like that. I found a place, like a really small online publication that let me do some, and it grew a little bit from there. And then I kind of did the first kind of bigger one I did was the, again, this is gonna sound so boring to people, but it's like everything to me is the world's greatest rock skippers. So these guys can skip a rock like 90 times.
I didn't know people measured rock skippers.
All right, well, let me tell you something real quick. So there's Kurt the Mountain Man Steiner, and there is, I forget his full name, but it's Rock Bottom, his skipping name.
Of course, right? It's Rock Bottom.
And these guys go back and forth. I haven't checked in a while, so people listening might want to go look at the records, but it's been a minute. They go back and forth with the Guinness Book World Record of most skips, and it's like 90-something. And you watch this, and it's art. I grew up on a farm with a lake. Skipping rocks was everything to me. Like my grandfather teaching me how to skip a rock. It's just something very beautiful about skipping rocks on a calm lake. So when I found out that there's these people out there with basically a Super Bowl of rock skipping,
yeah. I'm
like, yeah, I'm going. I took my wife and we drove to Michigan, like 15 hours, so I could go on a boat into an island, Mackinac Island, and watch them skip. And then I profiled them while I was out there. It was amazing. So yeah, that all happened. And then like at Timcast, I was just writing like true crime, paranormal, ghost stories, UFO stuff, sort of profiling people. Some of those stories are, I guess you could consider profiles, like this one guy whose brother was decapitated by the mob, or shot in the head first by crooked cops.
Wow. And
then took his head off. But yeah, and then like that all like shifted a bit when I got the opportunity to profile someone like Kanye. And then it kind of like from there, like it was just like Carrie Lake was after that. It was just it's beautiful.
Wow. See, just hearing you tell me this tells me like, because we were talking before, you were talking about how you're kind of like an introvert. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes people confuse like being introverted mean like you don't like people, and it's not the same thing.
Yeah,
Like I find people interesting as well. Mm-hmm. So as much as you're like, I don't want to care about that, but the way you're describing it makes it kind of sound interesting.
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with people. I could easily live in the woods the rest of my life. My wife needs some sort of civilization, but I'm working on her. Like right. I think, I keep joking like in like a year or two we'll probably be Amish. So none of this is going to happen. I'll be totally off the grid. But like, no, I also love people. Like people give me so much hope. There's a lot of darkness in the world, and it's awful. There's so much pain out there, but like just talking to people, it makes everything better. Yeah. Even if you talk to someone you don't like, if you take the time to like truly listen to them, I think you can open up a new like compassion, right? So I've trying to think of the writer. Well, like Joseph Mitchell's one of them, or Didion, where they would go out of their way to talk to people who were kind of like rejected from society. And I've always been interested in hearing that perspective, whether you agree with him or not. Which, a lot of people don't really like that. I'll talk to someone like Alex Jones, like a lot of people from home, which is in New York, weren't so happy when they saw me palling around with Alex Jones. He said a lot of things that they don't like, or they believe in a caricature of him that's not totally true.
Right.
Which happens for like any type of person. Even in your own community, there's that one person. I just always loved that though. My grandfather on my mom's side, he was a cop in the city, in New York City in the 70s. And he would talk to me about just like the power of talking to people, right? Mm-hmm. Like in the 70s, in the cities, in that city, it was ruthless. It was on fire all the time. Mm. There were dead bodies all the time. Crime was crazy. The Bowery looked like it was bombed out. It was brutal out there. So he was there at like a crazy time, and he just came back from the Korean War. So like, and like his brother, who was a little like 10 years older, had just come back from World War II, and he was one of the first guys to see Japan after the bombs. Wow. So somewhere in the family, there's like pictures of this. But like throughout all that, he talked about the importance of talking to people. So, and that's how I grew up. That was one of the things that made me so sad when seeing like even conversations get politicized. Like years ago, you can't talk to that person.
Yeah.
You can't talk to this person. They said this and that. I'm like, I don't care. Literally, I know how I feel. I will talk to anybody, even if I think they're hateful. I want to walk away because I always said this to my students when I was a teacher. I was a professor of writing, of fiction and English and poetry for a while. Mm. And first day of class, I talk about objectivity and subjectivity. I'd be like, do you guys know the difference? Because like, I didn't tell them this, but I think they're being brainwashed. Everyone's being brainwashed with how they read their articles, right? Because an article that claims to be objective is actually sneakily subjective, right? They throw in some adjectives, very telling things. They might use a certain picture to kind of twist the way you think about the subject.
Right.
And that's been something that's pissed me off my whole life, right? Like growing up, I loved Marilyn Manson growing up, and I loved like Ice Cube. And in the news, they were demonized. I knew as a fan, I don't know them personally, but like, I knew as a fan, they're not what they're saying on the news, right?
Yeah,
right.
Because I remember Marilyn Manson, especially after Columbine, they would go after him constantly.
And it wasn't even him. Those people, those terrible kids, man, who shot that school up, they weren't even fans of his. That was like, that's not even a thing. They actually liked another band, but the band shouldn't even be blamed in the first place. Right. But like I learned early on from that kind of stuff that the news is full of shit. Right. And like, the artists, like these musicians, they mean a lot to me. Like music is everything to me. So I just remember like, we only had like 7 channels growing up. I didn't have internet until college, which is probably all right. I don't have a TV now. My wife and I have never owned a TV. We're not free. We still have phones and whatnot. But yeah, like watching them twist people in the news was really upsetting. And then it's just like obviously everything culminated, I would say, during Trump, 2015, 2016, and it was like the lines were drawn, and it was like any hint of you supporting Trump, like you're done, right? And I never wrote anything politically at all. But at a certain point, for certain people who were running those newspapers or those magazines I was trying to freelance for, they would look at your silence as a way of you saying something, right? Oh, he didn't say anything. He must like Trump, right? Because they were looking for you to have that virtue signal on your Instagram page or whatever, even though I didn't really use it like that back then. Right. And I would never get political because obviously I write a lot about politics now, but back then that was the last thing I wanted to write about. I was like, it's not fun to me, right? And I'm obsessed, always been obsessed with politics. It's a disease. We're like political junkies, but like, and it is fun to write about it because it actually helps like exercise those demons. But yeah, like I noticed I wasn't getting jobs anymore for not saying stuff that might have aligned with certain things. You might even say a phrase that the editors would pick up on that you would think was like nothing big at all. I'm trying to think what that was. There's one sort of big one talking about profiling people. One of my favorite profiles from back in the day was. I spent a lot of time with the guy who makes a living impersonating President Theodore Roosevelt. And this guy looks like him, sounds like him, and he travels up and down. And I was with him when he redid the trail, the path that Roosevelt took when McKinley was shot. And so he was out hunting or whatever on top of a mountain, and they were like, you're the president now. So he had to like take a horse and carriage down the mountain and get sworn in, all this stuff. But the guy who played Teddy worked for some type of political activist group way back when that was like 2 or 3 people separated from like I forget what it was. It's not Soros, but it's something like maybe a Murdoch, something on the right. And they were like, the editors were like, oh, you really want to write about this person? He has a checkered history. He's an activist with, 3 people between him and this other, whatever it was. And I was just like, man, you can't say anything anymore. So all that was starting to get really bad. And like I noticed like conversations weren't being as open as they should be, right? So all that is to say, I was getting so sad with like the climate. Like I got into writing because I want to be able to say whatever I want, and I'm not going to be offended. You shouldn't be offended. Right. You can tell me if you're offended, and like we'll see how it goes. But like I don't like this like tiptoeing everyone had to do. Right. I think it's not happening as much now. So we'll see after what we were just talking about on Twitter with the safety stuff. But I just grew up in a household where it was like you have those conversations with the whole town, and it was fun. I liked it. We didn't hate each other, but now a lot of people do.
So it's interesting because I've talked about this before as far as like dealing with depression and things like that, and going to therapy. And when you do stuff like that, you become very introspective, and then you become very aware of. I mean, if you're taking it seriously, you become very aware of your behavior and what you do. But then, I think for me, it became like, well, that's interesting. So psychology became like a thing of great interest for me.
Yeah.
It sounds weird to say, but Dr. Phil, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I know you don't watch TV. But
Yeah. Sure. I know who he is.
I would watch Dr. Phil.
Yeah.
And everybody was like, Dr. Phil. But it's not necessarily about Dr. Phil, although he has some great assessments on things.
Yeah.
What it was about was the pattern. And so I would see, like, it would be a drug abuse person. Okay. Guaranteed they have an enabling family member. Boom, they're on the show, enabling family member. Yep. They're there to get help, but they're actually the ones who's like taking them to get drugs and giving them money.
Right.
And then Dr. Phil would say, of course, you're enabling them.
Yeah. So true.
And then they would always have the same narrative. Everything was fine. And then one day they just became like this. And then Dr. Phil would literally like break down their entire childhood history where they weren't fine.
Right.
And actually they were doing these things or this impacted their life.
Yep.
And it would be like the same story, but for people all over the country who were coming to Dr. Phil asking for the same type of help.
Right.
They all had the same story. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. That people from different walks of life, like don't know each other. Some of them from Canada, some from the United States, but they all have a single problem, and it's a family member or a loved one of some sort that is dealing with some sort of problem, and they're coming to Dr. Phil, help me. And some of them would even say, like, I watch your show all the time. Yet here they are repeating the same thing. They didn't catch on to the enabling and all this other stuff. So when I to kind of bring it over to like the politics side, when I started writing, because you were talking about what kind of got you interested in writing, for me, it was feeling like I wasn't allowed to express myself. When I never felt like that before. And it was during 2020, shortly after George Floyd. And it wasn't necessarily about George Floyd, but it was the fact that for me, as someone who I didn't express anything publicly. I was an IT guy. I didn't do any of that stuff. But it was the fact that I wasn't even allowed to say something. Right? Not that I was actively saying something, someone cut me off. But if I wanted to, I couldn't say something. And that bothered me. And so that made me like reach out and try to like go on free speech forums instead of like Facebook. I wasn't even on Twitter. Facebook, like just everybody having panic attacks over stuff. And I'm like, am I the only one that's crazy or is everybody else crazy? And I got encouragement from this free speech platform. They're like, great. Oh, you should write because how you explained yourself is pretty good.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's what led me into writing the book and the rest is history.
Wow.
But it's the understanding that I'm looking at things often from a psychological lens. And I'm looking at behavioral patterns. I'm looking at convincing people, persuasion, things like that. And then added on top of that, now that I've gotten more into the media, I'm looking at rhetoric.
Oh yeah.
Right, because rhetoric leads to persuasion. You mentioned how the media lies. Well, false framing,
Yep.
Not putting in certain facts, like omitting
Yep.
factual information.
Yes.
My favorite slash the thing I hate the most
Yeah.
is when they tell a story and then they provide a factual information that has nothing to do with the story.
Yes.
Like Donald Trump went to South Korea to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Donald Trump has also been accused of white supremacy, and so I was like, what does that have to do with this trip to?
They do it, and they'll do it on the flip too. They'll do it for the people they're trying to like cover for.
Right.
It's if it's in the media's eyes, it's a quote unquote good person. They'll give them all these different type of adjectives leading up to it, or like really bright shining things. Where like you also could have picked a bunch of dark stuff too. But
Right.
we know what you're doing, right?
Right.
It's crazy. Like teaching English 101, teaching writing in general is psychology, right? Especially for students like in a college. Like you're kind of like in a creative writing class where I'm letting them kind of write whatever, just in different types of formats throughout the semester, whether it's a personal essay or a short story, you know, and I'm telling them they're allowed to pull from personal experience.
Right.
So it's like, I'm like sometimes helping kids through like some dark shit. I'm like, oh man, like what's going on at home? You know, I'm not getting involved. But like, I'm going to make them the best writers possible. Then
Right.
Something I always think about. Sometimes I tell them this, depending on the age of the class. I'd be like, they tell me a terrible story. I'd be like, man, that's brutal that happened to you, but that's awesome for the page. Right. And like, just tell me now, write it on the page like you just told me, right? So that was one thing I liked, and like but it was mostly apolitical stuff. You could bring that out of students in class, but it was for sure like the psychology. Also, like even on in a broader perspective, it was also psychology of like our culture, you know, because like every semester, this new crop of students would come in, and in our like hyper crazy environment that we're in, where it's like there's new rules every day and what you can and can't say, I would see it every semester, right? So kids would come in, and I'd show them they hated reading Flannery O'Connor, right? Because there was a bad word in it, right? And they're like, but I'm like, the person saying the bad word is a bad person, right? We don't like that person. That's why they're saying a bad word.
Right.
But they didn't care about the nuance of that. They'd be like, oh no, we can't have that word. I'm like, okay. So you'd see little things like that shift every semester, which made another thing that just made it no fun, right? Because like I got into writing to just do whatever. Oh, and the other thing I was going to say is like first day of class stuff. I talk about the immune system, like the immune system of your ideas and your beliefs, like everything. If you're afraid of encountering things that are going to hurt your ideas, you have a problem. And then if you shelter yourself from those things, like when you do encounter them, when you're forced to encounter those things, you will fall apart, right? So you have to expose yourself to these things, like even if you don't like them. Like that's the point. And like I would let them get political in class. I would never insert my politics, right? And this is right as Trump was running, you know, which is at the time I wasn't really supporting Trump, but it was hilarious to watch kids freak out. And I tried to navigate them away from insanity, right? And they could write whatever they wanted. I didn't care. I just want the story to be good, right? And use good words, have nice transitions, you know, make it flow. Everything looked good. But yeah, man, the immune system stuff was so key. So it's like that's the one thing I do miss about being in a classroom is like you have this insight into the psychology of like the culture growing up right now. Because I like hearing what they were into too. You know, a lot of that stuff is not stuff I was into, but some of it, we had a lot of similarities as well.
Right.
You know, so we could talk about music, different art, different books, what might be back in style in terms of whether it's fashion or music or whatever. You know, I loved that kind of stuff, but overall, college just became untenable. You know, and I ended up having to quit as they were going to make me get a vaccine I wasn't going to get, so I was out. And they also kind of screwed me over just in terms of like I was an adjunct. So gotcha. If you know anything about adjuncts, it's like semester to semester. You don't know if you're going to get work the next semester. They could take it away from you and not tell you. You know, it's a terrible gig. So I miss it, but I don't miss it.
I didn't realize it was that soon.
Yeah. I'm still fresh out. Like I had no job lined up when I quit. Like it was scary, and we had just bought our first house, and we had let's see. Yeah, our daughter was born already, so we had 2 kids, and my wife was just losing her job too because she wasn't getting a vaccine.
Oh, wow.
So we were, and yeah, it was crazy. So nothing lined up. I was a furniture mover at the same time as a professor because the adjunct job didn't pay at all. So I was in a box truck every day in the morning for like 8 hours, and then those were early days. And I'd teach night classes at 2 different colleges, just scraping money together, right? And living at various people's houses until we got our own house, and then we were able to put a down payment down after many years. And then that was the day we signed on our house. Was the day New York locked down for good. And
Great timing, by the way.
yeah, it was crazy. So. I had nothing lined up. It was crazy. And then like 2 weeks later, Tim Pool reached out, and like we had no connection either, like at all. I had emailed them a long time prior, like 6 months earlier, about a job I heard him talk about, and it was just like, man,
You just happened to get to it.
God was just like, there you go. And it was crazy because I say the thing about the furniture mover because I was ready to go back to driving a truck, or maybe get a license to drive a bigger truck, or I was going to be a tour guide for my local town. I was going to like take people around on tours on the bus. I had a microphone, like legit. I did all the training, and man, like Tim just kind of like came out of nowhere, and we were able to escape New York, which is like
Even better.
a godsend.
It's so it's so interesting you bring up Tim and how he just kind of like came out of nowhere. I never really talked about this much. So I don't agree with everybody on everything. There's a lot that I agree with on politically with Tim. But there's a lot of things I think symbolically that I appreciate about him.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes we shit on people who build stuff. And the fact that he was able to take like the little bit of notoriety that he was creating for himself as someone who was sleeping on couches and doing all these different things, and struck a little bit of luck and took advantage of certain opportunities and figured out the YouTube algorithm and figured it out. And I quite literally watched as I think I started watching him originally when he was doing just like videos by himself. And I remember when he started Timcast IRL. And it just seemed like it just blew up from there. Like it just, everything worked. And he could have been like how other people are, where it's like, I'm getting my money and I'm doing nothing with it. At least he's trying to build something. And I think there's something incredibly important about trying to build, especially if it's coming from a positive place.
Totally agree.
And if he, like I think about it like this, if he didn't do that, where would you be? What would be your situation? And he came in at the right time. And so, I'm trying to build something with Wrong Speak. I pay people routinely. And I, for the most part, I pay from my own money. And very similar to what Tim does. Now, I don't make as much as Tim, but but I work 6, sometimes 7 days a week. To do this, even though the financial returns aren't necessarily there as of right now, but I think the reason I'm doing it is because there's a bigger purpose at hand. That I'm giving people opportunities to do something. Like with Wrong Speak, I'm trying to get people to express themselves. My editors, both actually, I have 3 editors now.
That's great.
So 2 of my editors, when I first met them, one went by an anonymous name, like a random username, and no profile picture. The other one was using a pseudonym. And not for me saying you have to do anything, but just watching me as an example. And Rebecca, who's our opinion editor, she wrote under a pseudonym, and she would write stuff for us. And I liked how she wrote, and I appreciated her, and she just seemed like a really good person. So when the time became available, I was like, I'm looking for someone to write for us. So at first, I brought her on to write. I was like, I will pay you to write. And I don't make that much, but I'm going to pay you to write. It's some sort of incentive.
That's great.
And then it turned into, well, I need an editor, right? And initially she was backing up Audra. And then things have shifted, so now she's the opinion editor.
Incredible.
And all of these different things happen because I'm trying to build something, and I see certain people, and maybe for other people they're not the first people that you would choose,
Right.
but I see something with them, and I believe in them, and I actually got to meet when we were talking about America Fest. She came out there.
Oh, wait.
She lives
That's
in
awesome.
Arizona.
That's awesome.
And
That's great.
this last conference that I went to Freedom Fest. Audra flew out.
That's
and
great.
Audra, we met for the first time in person.
That's amazing.
And so all of these things, and I met them on Twitter, by the way. Initially. So
another reason why the pros might outweigh those cons.
What's that?
The meeting these people, like changing lives.
Oh,
Getting people to fly out and they travel and they meet you, and like it's beyond just digital spaces.
Right. It's beyond digital spaces. Like Rebecca just had another child. I think she has like 5 kids now.
Oh wow.
She has a whole litter.
Yeah, dude. Like watching Tim build this, it's crazy to be a part of it. I was listening to him a lot in the years prior. I found out about him through like the Rogan thing when he was on with Jack Dorsey. I was like, who the heck is this guy? And then I started following him. So it was crazy to hear from him. But like thinking of how he changed my life, like Tim bringing me on with this opportunity has made my kids' lives like better. Like I got to leave. We could have left New York, right? It would have been a lot harder, right? But we now had a reason, and like we were like out, because COVID destroyed New York.
Right.
We weren't in the city. We were like an hour and a half north of the city, like in the country.
Right.
But my kids didn't have a life anymore. Like not say all of our friends. A lot of our friends disappeared during COVID. They got really afraid, and that's fine. We were afraid for like maybe 3 weeks to a month. My wife was super pregnant at that point with our daughter, and when she was pregnant with our son, it was Zika virus, and I'm paranoid. So I was like, I killed every mosquito in New York. Like I wasn't letting them touch because it was that virus that would like mess with the kids' skulls, right?
Yeah,
so I was like, yeah, it's not happening. Even though it wasn't even near New York. I probably had like a giant radius of mosquito deaths in the tri-state area. I was just going like so hard on them. But like then COVID happened, and for those first few weeks, I was like, I don't know what this is. I'm worried for my wife and our unborn kid. And then the logic just wore away, like real quick on like the lockdown stuff. I remember I ordered pizza from the local spot in town, and they were on the phone, and it was like a crazy drug deal. They were like, all right, the pizza guy is gonna come up your driveway, and you're gonna put the cash on the rock away from the car, and they're gonna put the pizza over here. And I'm like, man, like they're touching the money. Like they weren't even wearing gloves. Like they're touching the money. He's touching his steering wheel. I'm touching like none of it made sense. Like you're not thinking this through. You're making all these rules that make no sense.
Right.
I mean, it was sweet that we could get margaritas to go for once, but like other than that, it was just so stupid. So that the fear wore off, but it obviously didn't for everyone else. And then our son, I guess that was like 3 or 4 years ago. He was like 3 or 4 at the time. His school shut down, our friends disappearing. It was just, you couldn't live like that. And it was so expensive, like just in general. The taxes are crazy. And I had no future in teaching. Like as an adjunct for almost 10 years, it was, no matter how good I was doing, there was no promise of that next semester.
Right.
And that was really tough when you have like a young family. It's just why I was doing the furniture mover stuff too. So yeah, like Tim building something, and then like by the grace of God bringing me on, like hooked up my family so much. Because now my kids they're living a life, right? They're at school, like, and you can go back to school now in New York, but like if we have lockdowns again, I dread what will happen to those kids up there, right? Like even that month of all of us like doing all the COVID protocols, we wore a mask, my son was messed up because his school forced the mask, right? Before they shut down randomly. I remember the first time I was like, no more mask. He had like a problem because he was young. That was his life, right? He had a hard time taking it off, even outside. That's how bad the schools were like messing with all the kids. I remember like basically like, and this is like when I was like, we gotta leave New York, even before the Tim thing. We picked him up from his school. They had recess outside. They made them wear the mask. And like his mask was dripping sweat. Literally, I was like, you're waterboarding these kids. Like you're legit, like his face has a cloth on it, and his sweat it's wet. The whole thing is soaked. Wow. This is insane. Like the teachers are crazy. So yeah, watching people build something is amazing. I'm like so happy to be a part of it, and like all the things it's given to us. But like I can't imagine the stress also of like, being on that end and getting people together, getting people who are reliable. I don't know how it is, but like I see a lot of people in the world in general, there's like a lack of urgency in people. I don't want to say that's just a post-COVID thing. There's a lot of people who definitely like got a check from the government, lost their job, and they kind of like that little vacation they had. But I just see like in everything, like in a lot of places you go, like whether it's the wait staff or, you know, some barista, there's like no like love of their life anymore. And maybe it's like this widespread nihilism that's happening that I think happened before COVID. But down here it's definitely better, but it's still, I think it's like you can't escape that thing. As much as I've been traveling, I see it everywhere. But yeah, I mean, Tim is crazy what he's doing. I mean, this dude started with a camera in his room, and then like in a matter of a few years, like, he technically started with a camera in his hand at Occupy Wall Street, I guess, and then it went to a room, right? Just him and the camera, and to build it's amazing and it's inspiring. Like the work ethic is crazy. Like this dude is making videos every day, all day long. Like it's a different type of brain that I have, and like I'm like a slow writer. It's excruciating. Meanwhile, he's just pumping out like stuff every day, and it's great.
So I haven't really talked about this, but like in some ways, Tim has been impactful for me. I can't remember, obviously, at the time during the pandemic, I was, and especially like right after George Floyd, but it was right around that time when I decided to do it. But definitely like while I was contemplating it. Yeah, I think it was right around the same time. I was watching Tim do like his normal news stuff. And he was basically saying like, people need to do something. You know, you need to do something. And I just remember him like saying that, and I think he said it in multiple videos. Like he was exclaiming that all these things are happening, yet we have all these people who are doing nothing about it. Like you need to go out there and do something. And I was like, shit, he's right. I need to do something. And that was like that was one like kind of important area on top of like other things that were pushing me in the direction
for sure
to go on that.
Dude, we kind of have a similar origin story politically then, because those videos, I remember those videos, and I was it was after like a lot of the riots, lockdowns, like the world just was nuts, right? Like everyone, like your neighbors were mad at you, like everyone was angry, and then like what we were saying earlier about the lack of like being able to communicate how you'd like to. It seemed like if you said anything, you get your head chopped off. And I don't like that. Like I tend to love like the writers or the artists who tend to push buttons on like their audience and people outside of the audience, right? You don't to me, it doesn't just make good art. I love that art. There's other great types of art as well. But for whatever reason, since day one, that's resonated with me, always. And I felt myself being really afraid to say anything. And I didn't know how to express myself either. Like I didn't write politically before, you know, but I was listening to everyone. And I grew up listening to everyone. But then Tim saying those videos, the world seemed like it was on fire, you know. And I just started writing a poem. It was at the time, it was like the only way I knew how to express myself, right? I taught poetry. I was in the middle of a really good poetry class I was teaching, really enjoyed it. I remember telling the kids, they came to class one day and they're like really afraid about COVID because it was in the news, it's like in Italy. And I'm like, it's gonna blow over. We're fine, you know. It's in Italy, like it's not.
Thanks, Professor.
Yeah. Thankfully, man, those kids still follow me. It's awesome, and I get to see them write still, so it's great. But I always think back to that last day of class before lockdown happened. I was being super optimistic. Like, damn, Professor Cashman, fuck that up. But yeah, with Tim saying all that, I was like, okay, I'm gonna write this poem. I don't know if it's gonna go anywhere. But it's going to be like just like I'm vomiting everything I've been holding in. And this is against everybody, right? It's not just like a pro-Trump. It's not an anti-Trump. It's just like, but this poem was a flamethrower, right? And that's how I felt. And it was so cathartic. Like just writing, I was like, holy shit. It's super long. It's like a really long poem. And it felt really good. And I was like, I knew if I published it, even which I ended up doing on my own, like I think it was on my Medium account. I think it was Medium, and then eventually I had a video go along with it. But at first it was just on Medium. But before I did that, I was like, I sat my wife Nancy down, and like I was like, I wrote this poem. I was like, we're gonna lose, I think, a majority of our friends. even though it's not like, even though it has a good heart to it, like I believe it does, and it's in the end positive, like they're not gonna like what they are hearing. And I know those friends. I can already sense the messages I'm gonna get. I thought I did. So she read it. We were sitting like this. We were just eating, and she read the poem on my phone. And I was like, I'm gonna publish it. So right before July 4th, I think it was either June or July, I forget, when it was really crazy, I put it up and I published it. Man, it got a great response, like a really good response from a lot of people. But like some of my closest friends, the grown men, like call me, legit crying, because they were upset with me.
I was like, why did they cry?
Legit, like at midnight. The one guy just had a kid. I'm like, in my head, I'm like, oh, okay. In my head, I'm thinking a lot of things. I'm like, this is sick. Like that people are having this reaction, right? Talk about pushing buttons. I'm like, I found a way to push some buttons. Like this is a lot of fun. I don't like confrontation, although I will definitely get into it at times. But like, that was the first time I was like, okay, I really believe in what I did. I knew this was going to happen, but it was crazy to see like grown men react a certain way, right? And like these guys are calling me up, they're crying, they're like, oh, it's like the whole thing, like, well, I thought I was on the right side of history. Like, first of all, I hate that phrase.
I hate it so much.
Second of all,
that was just
you have a new kid. Like, go be with your wife. Like, stop calling me. But I'm also like, this is hilarious. You know, like, what's up? So that was my I'm coming out with this. And then I couldn't stop. And, sorry. I'm getting choked up thinking about my poem now.
You have some water.
Yeah, but like, it was called I Will Not Join Your Cult. But it went after everybody. And I never felt better. Like, even after losing those friends, it was, I learned a lot about like, I could tell holding it in was more of a problem for me. Like, I was getting sick and depressed for not saying what I really believed. Even though I thought it was coming from a good place, I knew how it would be perceived, right? Right. So, yeah, after that, I was like, well, now I feel free to do anything, right? And I didn't go crazy. I mean, to some people, they probably interpreted it as what I was doing crazy, but now I was just saying things, right? Right. But you just being like anti-lockdown or whatever, like now in some people's eyes, now you're a monster, right? And like, you know, my mom was very like, oh, what is going on with my son? You know, stuff like this. And I'm willing to have those conversations. But my goodness, you know, I was sort of prepared for that after like writing something that was going to be so, I didn't want to say controversial, but like with certain friends, like, because I had no audience at that point. Like really, I had a few people reading, and like I was decent at freelancing, but no real following or anything. So I basically wrote it for my friends, you know, to start shit and also just be like, this is my catharsis. Because I can't like move on. I can't have you come to my house and saying things that I think are terrible, right? And I remember just having those conversations with people. I'm like, you sound like you're hateful. You're telling me you're like this like bleeding heart liberal, but you sound hateful, like what you're saying, whether it's about like trans kids or black people, the riots, lockdowns, like everything you're saying to me sounded horrible, right? Mm-hmm. You think you sound good. I think you sound like you're hateful and you're projecting. Something's like off with this. And you're believing in a lot of like policies or people that I think are also really bad people, right? Mm-hmm. Left and right, you know, it's a lot of them. So yeah, I felt good. I was like, it got out of my system, and I haven't really stopped since. But yeah, it was fun times.
Those were good times. I have my version. So I'll tell you a couple. So there was a friend group of mine that I had. I met actually through Meetup.
Oh yeah, I just heard about this like this morning. Never heard of this in my life. Yeah. I listen to FM radio still. I'm 80 years old, and they were talking about me. I'm like, oh, that's what the kids are doing these days. That's what the kids are doing. So this was when I was Democrat liberal, right? And I was within that box, and I wanted to meet up with some people, and I went to this one event, and I kind of liked the guy. Mm-hmm. So then we started organizing like our own kind of meetups, mm-hmm. and we just became friendly. Right. So it was like a handful of us. And we would occasionally meet up and go to his house and plan like we wanted to do something. We never really did anything, but I think that's how it goes often. So I remember
I started slowly getting red pilled, not necessarily red pilled to become a conservative or
Right.
anything like that, but red pilled to the conclusion that you made a long time ago that the media is full of shit. And I was like, no, the information I'm consuming, like I'm analytical, the information I'm consuming.
On a good diet of information.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm analyzing it, right?
Yeah, for
but
sure.
you realize, like, actually you're analyzing like a percentage of the truth.
Exactly.
Or half of the perspective.
Right. Yep.
And so I'm like, oh. And they're telling me that no, this is it.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, the other half perspective, this is what they think. So I'm getting the filtered version of what the right thinks from the left. So I started becoming more aware of that. I've written about encountering certain people who open me up to seeing certain things.
Yep.
And I just became curious, and I started doing audiobooks and learning about stuff, like even about Trump. I was
This
like,
sounds like you're an extremist. Words like curious, I mean,
Curious.
that's a little too much.
So like I was going through all of that stuff.
Yep.
No public presence, and I wasn't even telling these people about it. I was just doing it for myself.
For sure.
So then COVID comes through. I'm like, all of this is weird. So I was never like, I was never for the lockdowns. Only from the sense, I think like how most people were like, oh, let's just see if this blows over in a week.
You know what it was.
Right. But at that time, I was paying attention to actually that in Italy, it's affecting the old people. Right. And I've been paying attention. I think that's kind of important that we know that it's affecting the old people. Not everybody is terminally ill when they get sick. So I'm paying attention to all this stuff. I'm learning about different things. Getting audiobooks. Lockdowns happen. My life was a little bit weird. I was actually still going into the office for work every day.
Wow.
Yeah, so my life was very odd. Getting onto the highway, no one's on the highway.
Zombie. It's like
It was like the zombie apocalypse happened.
Wow.
And I'm still supposed to go into the office.
Modern zombie hell. It's crazy.
But I bring that up because I was having my own personal transformation, but I didn't hate the people they were progressive leaning. I would say more liberal and maybe some of them more progressive.
Right.
One of them actually calls himself a socialist. But generally speaking, I hung out with them. I liked them.
Right.
One of them went on Facebook and said, the President of the United States just said that he wants Americans to drink chlorine or drink bleach.
Yeah.
And I said, that's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
I was like, let me watch the video.
Yeah.
And I watched the video, and in the full video, I'm like, I was like, he didn't say that.
Like
so I went
rewinding, like, what, did I miss it?
right.
Yeah.
I watched it twice.
Yeah.
I was like, so then I went on Facebook and I replied to him politely. And I said, hey, I just watched the video and he didn't say that. And I was like, granted, he's not the best wordsmith, but he wasn't telling people to drink bleach.
Right.
And he had to admit that I was right. Woo. Well, yeah, but he should be better with his words. I was like, but that's not, you said he went on television and told people to drink bleach.
Yeah, you should be better with your words.
You should be, thank you. Fucking thank you.
Right.
So he had to admit that, right? And then all of a sudden, all his lefty friends started coming after me.
Man.
Like I said something completely different.
Right.
Saying like, and I was like, listen, lady, I don't even know who you are.
Right.
Like, don't message me like that. She's like, someone I know is in the hospital, and I was like, but that has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
I didn't say anything. Right? I didn't even say that Trump is great or anything. I said nothing like that. I'm just being factual. He did not say that. And telling people he said that actually is irresponsible, like you're saying that the president is being irresponsible.
Exactly.
So what does he do? He unfriends me. He admits I'm right and then unfriends me.
Can't take it.
So I was like, all right, whatever. It's okay.
Yep.
The next morning, I want to say it was the next morning, another friend from that friend circle reaches out to me like it's a fucking intervention.
Oh, we got to help you.
Adam, what's going on?
Whoa.
I'm like, what?
Struggle session.
Like, sends me this long message. I was like, what is this?
Man.
And it was just, I was like, this is fucking unbelievable. Mind you, like a week prior with this person, because they went and got their bachelor's in science, right? So now all of a sudden there's master in science. Yeah. I asked him a question: what's so important about 6 feet? I've never heard this in my entire life. Why 6 feet?
Right.
Adam, you're being ignorant. Da, 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 da. I was like, hold on a second.
Just asking a question.
I'm just asking a question.
Yep.
I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just asking a question because I've never heard this in my life. Yep. Why 6 feet? Yep. Why is it so wrong for me to ask this question?
Why can I sit down at a restaurant without a mask? Do I have to walk in with a mask?
Right.
Like, none of this made any sense. And who's making these rules?
Right. It's all arbitrary.
Yep.
But I was legitimately asking a question. And what was crazy to me was that so many people that I knew that were left-leaning, I would more so call them liberals,
right,
all of a sudden became anti-liberal. And it was so strange. That same person...
It's scary.
I've written about this. That same person, we used to talk about the woke people and how they were ridiculous, right? These crazy people with purple hair and saying all types of crazy stuff. Me and this person, it was a white female, we used to talk about race. And we would... And understand like there's different perspectives, and we would talk about these things and have hours-long conversation. We were friends. Like I went to their house for Thanksgiving and Christmas time. Right. And met her family.
Wow.
And all of a sudden we get into this whole thing. We go like 8 months without talking. We finally talk again. And I kid you not, it was like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because she said to me, "Listen, I just listened to what black voices say." And I was like, "You do realize I'm black, right?"
It's like, what?
Like, it was so strange.
How could you say it with a straight face?
I don't know.
How can you say that with a straight fucking face? Dude, it's crazy the way people turned. Like, the way people turned during that specific summer was nuts. But like, I was primed a bit before that in terms of like what you're saying with, he didn't really say that. Like the was it in Charleston, North Carolina, the whole thing happened? Good people on both sides. That was for me one of those moments.
That was a big red pill when I realized, there was a whole bunch he said before that.
Dude. And I didn't even like the guy then.
Right.
Like, I didn't vote in 2016. Like, I didn't care. I did vote for him in 2020. Still not like a huge fan, but like by that time when that happened, I was in Savannah, Georgia with a really good friend, a much older lady, very successful lady. And so we're in her like nice house. And me and my wife walk in from that old car I got outside, not so old, but and she's just going off about how he said there's good people on both sides. And I was like, well, he didn't really say that. He denounced this and that. And she looked at us like we were insane. Like, I thought she was we were supposed to stay like the week, we did, but I thought she was gonna kick us out. Like, she was just like, how are these people thinking this? I could show her the video. I don't even think showing her the full video fully changed her mind, right? It's like we're in such a fractured reality now where you can literally show people the same video and they have completely different interpretations, right? Which is nuts, right? But that was for me one of those wake up things where I'm like, I'm now defending Trump and like, I don't even like him like that.
I know.
But I do like truth. I try to find the truth. I think it's also really hard to get to it, especially with the distortion of all the information we got going on. But that was like verifiably false. Like, I could like totally say, he didn't say that. So like, I had like that was going on. So by the time like lockdowns went on, and like, but it's funny, it's like, even though like I'm saying I knew the media would do that to someone like Manson or Q back in the day, and then to Trump, and like I had years of knowing all this, I was still under the spell too, for lots of things. Like, Obama got me, and like a lot of people I didn't. And like after his second term, I was furious with him, and it took me that long to realize, right? It was because of his administration's drone use, which is insane to me. Right. It was like 3 bombs every hour, every day for a year. That's just 1 year, right? And the way they would count what a death was, like he used George Bush Jr.'s definition of terrorist, which is a very vague number of a man in the Middle East. So you could get away with murdering people, right? And so I'm like, man, this guy's he's a war criminal, right? Just like all of them.
But he won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, a lot of bad people won the Nobel Peace Prize. It was such, and it's like, okay, yeah, me and him like a lot of the same music. All right, I think he's a really good speaker. He's really entertaining on shows. He knows how to get like people to laugh. Okay, he's also terrible. Like, as a president, like, it was really bad. But the news, I was digesting a bad diet of news at that point. I didn't
Yeah.
know about, at that point, like alternative news. I was at an art college, you know, at that point. So it was, I think 2008. I graduated 2007. So it was like leading up to the first election. You know, I was surrounded by art school. I still like had like certain values that today, you know, people see as right-leaning, like freedom of speech,
I know.
you know. But like as a liberal, like that was also important to me then.
I feel the same.
Like a lot of people get mad at me. I'm like, I'm mostly the same.
Yeah.
I'm still fighting for like the First Amendment because I really like love that. You know, I love that you can express yourself. I don't care who you are.
Right.
But yeah, like despite knowing what they can do to people, I was very. It's so crazy how strong like the spell can be.
Right.
On people, and like to the degree, I was just thinking about COVID, thinking about the spell on people, thinking about fear. I noticed that a friend had stopped being my friend recently. This is like, this person goes way back to college, right? And I felt like I should probably just delete her off of all the platforms during COVID because she was one of those like really bad people. But I was like, no, you know, she's afraid. She's a young mom, like.
Right. She's scared.
It's fine, you know? But she was like the type of person who, she would go outside and yell at people. Like, if they're working out on the playground in the city, and like, she thought it was such a good thing, and she would post those videos.
Right.
So I'm like, wow, you know? And I don't know what I did recently that she didn't like so much, but I was like, okay, you know, what's that next thing that you have to do? Like, I don't know, you know, I've said a lot of really crazy stuff, I guess, online, but it's just like, I can't stop thinking about how people acted that way, and I'm willing to forgive a lot of people, like peers. You know,
Right.
I'm not willing to forgive people in charge, right? Like Fauci, you know, stuff. Even Trump, in my opinion, totally mishandled COVID. But like, yeah, we were under fear, and that media, man, they really did a number. And then speaking of Italy, like, remember when CBS News ran the picture from the ER? They said it was from here, but it was from Italy, dude. And people are just like, why would you question it? Why would they lie? You know?
Right.
Maybe it was total incompetence, but who knows?
There's when they wanted to fearmonger about what's happening in Italy.
Yep.
There was a picture that was circulating about caskets. Like it was a warehouse filled with caskets.
Yes, I remember this.
And they were like, "This is what's going on in Italy."
Right.
But that photo was actually from something completely different from like a couple of years prior.
Yeah.
I think it had to do with the migrant situation. There might have been a boat.
Right.
If I remember correctly, it was like some sort of boat that capsized, and these are all the bodies of the people who passed away. I was like, wow, the propaganda is so strong.
That's why, like, what you're doing, like with Wrong Speak and the op-eds you get to write, like, you have the ability to like actually subvert these institutions that have the chokehold on culture, right? Because it's like, people who aren't even invested in politics like that, or like the cultural issues like decay, they just like us, talking about that media diet, they just believe it, they take it in, it's fine. A lot of people don't have time to go out and like really like research this shit.
Right.
When we have like a luxury to be able to do that now. But you know, you should, if you have feelings that are so powerful they're gonna make you go scream at a stranger in the city street because you're so afraid, like, you should be 100% on what your feelings are.
But I feel like that type of action is a result of purpose. Because the way I use a old coworker of mine, who's a good person. So this is not like trying to equivocate to him, but it's to give you an example. Prior to COVID lockdowns, very outgoing guy, he'd come in and he'd scream about how the Giants suck and they mess it up, or the Yankees this. You just watch the game, blah, blah. Huge sports fan. Lockdowns happen, and every day he comes in and he talks about the numbers of deaths. And he's like, did you hear the COVID cases here? Everything. For almost like a year, he would come in and talk about they're gonna announce the infections for just everything. Like his purpose of like just even having a distraction was taken away. Like all forms of entertainment, everything became about politics, and if it wasn't necessarily about politics, it became about COVID, which COVID was political.
Totally.
So like everything became about that, and I just think about that. I think about him, and then when everything started lifting, and the teams were happy, he went back to the Yankees and the Giants.
Well, that's good. At least thankfully he went back. Some people have a hard time.
Some people have a hard time.
Their politics are their sport now, right?
I had a neighbor. We were just, I don't even think I told you. We were living north of the city too. We were living in Carmel.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I know Carmel.
Yeah.
That's funny.
My wife and I were living in Carmel. I moved in with her for about a year, and then we got our own place in Jersey.
Awesome. Okay.
Our neighbor wore a necklace. I think it was a necklace. I don't think it was a bracelet. Wore a necklace. I kid you not. It says "fuck Trump." She wore it everywhere she went, all the time, 24/7.
She was a kindergarten teacher, you said.
and see, this is where I'm saying, like, I look at personality types, and I look at behaviors, and I look at all these things. I think generally she's a nice person.
Yeah.
But Trump was not the real issue in her life. Other things were issues in her life. But Trump became the thing that she could rally behind, and he gave her some sort of purpose, right? And especially if she could connect with people over "fuck Trump."
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right. And things like that. I kind of look at that.
Same
in the same way. I've met, because I've been to conservative events. I've met nutty conservative people. Now, they're not nutty because they're conservative.
Right.
They're just nutty.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I met them too. Yeah. They're on both sides. Right.
So that's what I'm saying. Like the personality type, these type of things. Like people think only leftists can be authoritarians. No. I've seen the right-leaning authoritarians too. Yep. They just don't think it. Yeah. They don't think it's possible, but it's happening. It's happening right underneath your nose.
They both think they're operating from good intentions that lead to authoritarianism.
Right.
And that's terrifying.
Right.
And they use the symptom of the fear ritual, like COVID, to prey upon the people's good nature, because I think most people are good natured. So and when you're under this spell, this fear spell, they'll be like, well, we'll just implement this and that. And all of a sudden, all your rights have been eroded, totally stripped away, which has been the case forever in this country. I think America started to die the second it was born, right? It's really sad. And I love this country. But we got so many problems. And after the Patriot Act too, they just keep taking away your privacy. They keep bombing strangers with your money. And I don't agree with any of that, right? I really hate that stuff.
But even worse, they're practicing psychological operations on us. So we go against each other. And that's where I try to tell people the culture war stuff is sort of culture war and sort of not. It's a class war that's happening.
Yeah.
And people don't see it that way.
Yeah.
They're so hyper-focused on race, so hyper-focused on sex, even the transgender stuff, which is so tiresome to talk about.
Yeah. Well, most of the people on the right are the ones who share the transgender videos.
I know. Just stop. I would not have any idea who Dylan Mulvaney is. I would have zero idea who Dylan Mulvaney is.
The right and the left love each other. They just don't know it. They couldn't exist without each other. It's like Batman and Joker.
Right.
It's the same. They need each other. I personally don't post that stuff. It is no interest to me. Right. I think it's an important thing in our society, in terms of the story and all this stuff. It's interesting because it's another one of the ways to take a barometer, put the barometer in and figure out what's the temperature here, what is going on, why is it wind going this way or that, But it's weird how everyone just obsesses over these things.
Right.
We should, to a degree, right?
To a degree, yeah. There has to be balance.
It's got to be balanced, because a lot of people. The reason we're in the place we're in, I think, is a lot of people did give up on trying to understand what's going on in the culture. Right, and you're totally right with the class stuff. In the middle, blue collar America is dead, dying. There's no middle class, and there's this crazy disparity now, and we're not helping the middle class at all. And in New York, you couldn't even be middle class. It's just unlivable up there. And also, you're not getting money. They're paying you nothing, and everything's really expensive.
Right.
And that's we love West Virginia. The cost of living is a little better. But yeah, it's people need to people don't have the time to go out and do all this research. We were saying, we have that luxury. But at the same time, if you got kids or you care about the future at all, you do have to know what's going on to a degree.
Right.
Because the news on the TV is just psychological warfare.
Right.
And it definitely happens in independent media spaces as well, where people on certain things, they just have a certain niche that they're filling, right? And going to just lambast you with this type of story, and they're lacking nuance too,
Right.
right? You need to know the difference here, but I don't know how you convince people, and it's kind of what we were talking about earlier. Is like, how do you start like rescuing culture? You know, and like culture is the thing, like art is the thing. Like to me, art's everything, right?
Right.
Music, the literature, whatever it is that you're doing, you can find a way to kind of reclaim culture through it without also making it hyper partisan.
Right.
I hope.
Like, and this is not to like big up myself, but it's something that I personally do because I enjoy doing it.
Yep.
When I write, I would say most of my articles, especially my Substack, but when I write for the New York Post, the best articles I get the most response for, and people letters to the editor and stuff like that, are the ones when I talk about something very personal, right?
Totally.
One of the ones that comes to mind is when I talked about the Uvalde shooter.
Yeah.
And how his mental state took a steep dive when his father couldn't come around anymore. And that's what witnesses were saying. As soon as his father didn't come around, he went really, really bad.
Oh, wow.
So I talked about the importance of fathers in children's lives and how it impacted me as a child not having my father.
Wow.
I got emails from people. Wow, I read your article. Wow.
That's great.
The letters to the editors. Jordan Peterson
No
has
way.
shared it. Yeah.
That's amazing.
I think even Dinesh had shared it.
Oh, wow.
So, or maybe there was a different article I wrote about.
Okay.
He might have done it for both. I can't remember.
Right.
But
That's
it's the fact that it touched people.
Yep.
And it's because storytelling is like the oldest thing that you could do. And I actually got this suggestion from someone when I was first writing my book. I sent them a sample of like what I wrote, and I was like, "What do you think?" And she was like, "It's good, but like," she kept calling me a libertarian. I don't know. She's like, "You libertarians are all the same, though." I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Especially you guys. Like, women read books too." And I was like, "What do you mean by that?" She's like, "Women like a story."
Yep.
And to go further into that, people like stories.
They need it.
And they need stories, and that's how you connect with people. And when I took her advice, that's when my whole book shifted, because
It's amazing.
it's like every introduction to something I would leave with a story.
Yep.
And then I would talk about how it connects into society and things like that. And so while I'll be talking about race, like, you know, on the surface level, we talk about race, but I'm talking about like a child growing up without his father and how it impacted him.
Right.
And I would get emails from people, or I get messages from people like, "Yo, that was my childhood too." And they don't look like me. Most of the people who say like, "I didn't grow up with my father," do not look like me.
Right.
And it's because it's human.
Yep.
It's relatable.
Yep.
In storytelling.
And that's exactly how you do it. Like,
Right.
You're totally right. Like the culture, like to reclaim it and stuff, is you got to make it personal again.
Right.
Without being, hyper partisan, because like that story right there goes across class, race, sex, like
Everything.
Unfortunately, right? It's terrible. But like, my wife had a similar story, right? And not knowing her dad and stuff, and there's so many people she's talked to who are so different from different places, and it's terrible. But telling those stories is how you can bring people together. It's probably why I like telling other people's stories.
Right.
I've written a lot of personal stories as well, but I really love hearing their stories, because there's always something that's going to be relatable.
Right.
No matter what. No, it could be the dude who plays Teddy Roosevelt, or it could be Kanye. But they all have something you will probably relate to. Kanye might be tough, but actually, like there is stuff.
There actually was some. So I probably shouldn't even be saying this, but like when Kanye did the Tucker Carlson interview, the thing that I took away was how his mother had lied to him about his father. And kept him away from his father, and how it impacted him. So I had actually pitched to the New York Post, "Can I talk about that?" And they accepted it.
Oh, wow.
And I wrote my piece, I sent it to them, and quite literally the next day he did the DEFCON 3. and then they were like, "You know what? Let's hold off on this for a day or two." And then he kept doing stuff.
That's
and like,
hilarious.
Yeah, well, I don't think this guy. I was like, yeah.
Meanwhile, I'm like, "Tim, I need to board a plane to LA. This is something I need to be around."
Right.
Because I thought it wasn't exactly like how I thought they were portraying. Yeah, he did say those things.
Right.
I don't think he was being hateful, though. I think I think like true, and he confirmed it. Whether or not it's true or not, leave it to the reader. But he did tell me. And I was like, "Are you being like Andy Kaufman?" Because I know he loves Andy Kaufman.
Mm-hmm.
I love Andy Kaufman, and he has shared extensively his love of Kaufman. And he's like, "Yeah, that's part of it." He said he was being Andy Kaufman and Bruce Lee, and like I'm like, It's I think you're saying it because this is like about redemption. And like it's some like really wild way of doing it because you also know how to like cause controversy, and you love it like clearly like every cycle of his career is controversy.
Right.
Now, Taylor Swift, even from back saying Jesus walks was controversial in the beginning because in pop music you didn't really say Jesus, right? Just like how God Only Knows was controversial when that came out for the Beach Boys many years prior. So I think he knows that wave of controversy, and he did. I mean, it was crazy. But like, I just felt like I saw something different, and I had to go out and do my best. And like, I'm grateful that he allowed me. I'm grateful that Tim let me go because he was also not saying nice things about Tim. He had just been at Tim's. I'm at the airport about to head out, and he's on Alex Jones, and he's saying like he's calling Tim all types of things, and I'm texting Tim like, "You sure? This is cool." He's like, "Yeah, dude, go." I'm like, "All right." I had permission from Kanye to go out, but I was like, "Man, he's like." Really ragging on Tim, but it worked out. Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing.
So I'm trying to remember if I wrote about it, but I have a theory. I think I might have done it for Human Events. Many of the things that Kanye does, and I'm just saying from like a behavioral standpoint.
Yeah.
Many of the things that Kanye does often is for male approval. So the most controversial thing that people know about is the Beyonce thing.
About like the
when he interrupted Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
He said Beyonce is the greatest artist ever.
Right.
But why did he do that? And who was he looking at when he said it? He was talking to Jay-Z. He did that for male approval.
Wow.
And when I look at all the wild stuff that he was doing just before.
Yeah.
Who was next to him? Nick Fuentes.
Yep.
And he would say something, and he would look at Nick and watch Nick's cringing or Nick's reaction or laughing.
Yeah.
He was doing it for male approval.
Wow.
And there's I did a whole article about it, but there was a number of things that he's done, at least like publicly, that you could see.
Interesting. Even the crying about the abortion stuff. I don't know if you talked about it, but like on stage for his first presidential run, he cried about maybe aborting his first kid, which they didn't.
Right.
But it's terrible.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I can see that.
And that is there are different things that I've picked up patterns when it comes to. I mean, because I'm also dissecting myself to some degree.
Now I'm scared, like what you're picking up on me. Let's get a report at the end.
Well,
I'm gonna grab water real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
But keep talking, 'cause I'm listening. But yeah, I got to read that Kanye thing.
It's very interesting. By the way, this tea is delicious.
That's the best. It's Numi, aged Earl Grey. It's the best.
Normally, I'm hit and miss with tea.
Yeah.
And I'll just drink it just because. I was like, this is really it's not even warm anymore.
Yeah,
it's just
so good.
It's so good.
Yeah, I love it. We're kind of like weird hippies. Like there's no fluoride in your water. My son, who's 7, we did a road trip, and we went to Maine and Rhode Island, and somewhere along that trip, someone said they're gonna get salmon, and my son said, "Oh, we don't eat genetically modified food." I might be raising a little Alex Jones, but like if you know what they've done to salmon,
turn the frogs gay.
Yeah. Yo, for real. It's funny to me that he says that, and like he gets like shat on for it, but then Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says it in a nicer way in his suit.
You know why?
Huh?
It's how you say it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Exactly it. I mean, Alex is a character.
He's a character.
He's a character, and he's. I don't want him to change, but it's just funny. You know, and I'm looking at the psychology of the culture of like how you can get away with it, right? Or Kanye saying things that sound crazy, then someone else says it in a nicer way, and that's it. But that's how culture starts. It's usually some madman saying something crazy first, and then people are shocked, and then over time it just like infiltrates people's like their mind, and they find a way to filter it out into a way that's more digestible for people. I don't know why I'm so drawn to the madmen though. Something about them has always been interesting to me.
That's like my wife. She's, I don't want to say infatuated, but she's highly interested in serial killers.
I thought you were going to say she's crazy. I was like, wow, you better be careful.
Yeah, as we're recording this.
Yeah.
No. She's very interested in serial killers. And I make fun of her all the time. I'm like, you're like in love with Ted Bundy. She's like, no, that's not it.
Interesting.
She got into it because she couldn't understand what kind of person would do something like this. So like she just started watching everything. She's to the point where she could tell you like the names of the victims and like the dates and what they were doing, because she's seen all different types of FBI profilers and all this other stuff.
Yep.
So, but I think there is something interesting about people who are on the extremes.
Oh yeah.
And so someone who is like a madman ruler, who kills millions of people, while his activities are bad, it is so far removed from what most people would do.
Yeah.
That it's like, what is this freak in humanity?
How did this happen?
How did this happen?
Yeah.
And the scary part is that type of person is in a lot of people. They just don't have the opportunity to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like what Jordan Peterson was saying about like in the gulags and stuff. You know, like I think it was gulags about, you don't know how evil you can actually be. Yeah. Until you're in that situation. I have a serial killer problem as well. I spent like 10 years writing one story about a serial killer. You know, I started when my wife was pregnant with our son, so it's like 7 or 8 years. But they just arrested the guy after 13 years of it being a cold case. So on our road trip that I was just telling you about, it just like lined up that his court date was when I was in New York. I was like, oh man, I gotta go. I gotta see this guy. I want to look him in the eye, because I'm still like, even though he sounds like he's actually the killer, because everything they've reported on him sounds about right, but I'm so like skeptical of everything now, or like I'm skeptical of even him being the suspect, right? Right. I haven't seen evidence. I've only seen what the news has reported, and a lot of that has come from the DA, and I also don't trust the government. So I'm like, all right, it sounds good, but like, man, being in the room with that guy after like years of writing about the idea of him was wild. And if it is the guy, and if they are correct with the information, supposedly he spent like thousands of hours reading everything. So there was like a bunch of us in that courtroom who had written stuff. I don't know if he read mine or the person next to me, but at one point, on his way out the door, he just turned and looked at us, and it was like, holy shit. And he's like, people aren't sure exactly, but he's between 6'4" and 6'8". I'm 6'2". He was huge and like 275 supposedly. Wow. So for this guy to like just turn slowly, and like, I don't want to say he looked nefarious, because it was like a very blank expression, but just to look at us like that, it was crazy. So I get the appeal of the serial killer thing, because I also like, I can't believe people like that exist. Yeah. And there's a lot, right, throughout history. And there's so many we don't even know about. Like when you look at the FBI stats, they just guess. They don't know. There's probably a ton out there this guy got away with it for 13 years, as far as we know. It could be longer, right? And they found a graveyard of like 11 people on a beach where like people go surfing, like across from the beach on another part of the road. So like, yeah, I don't know what it is about that appeal of like learning about it or writing about it. To me, it's just like serial killers are just. It's just pure dark. It's just pure evil, and it's like a very like solid thing to write about in terms of like matter, right? Like it's like politics is so like vague sometimes and abstract, and we're just talking about ideas. It's like, this is evil, and like I can like almost weigh it, like when I'm writing about it, like how you're talking to victims' families, right? And like I hate it on one regard, because like I don't like making them talk about it, right? And it's like this weird thing about journalism is like I always call them, myself included, like this kind of grief war, right? Where I'm like, why am I going out of my way to talk to these people, right? Why am I making them talk about it? For them, it's kind of a catharsis. They could say no, and that's fine. But the people who did talk to me, it was kind of like a catharsis, I think. And at the time, there were no answers from the cops. So the people helping like write about it were like, it was their only like hope of like, we got to keep the story alive, right? We don't know why our daughter died. But then, yeah, like just, I don't know, for me, there's always been like a paranoia about the world. It's just as beautiful as it is, and as much as I love people, it is incredibly fragile and violent, right? And there's like always something bad happening, right?
Always.
And I'm trying, like right now, and I'm trying to, just understand it to some degree as best I can. And through the true crime stuff that I get to write, which I haven't done in a little bit. I did write about, being in the courtroom with this supposed killer. But I don't know, I just learned something new about humans writing this type of stories. Just like how fucking dark they get and how few answers there are. It's terrible.
It's interesting. The way I see like America, we are incredibly comfortable.
Yeah.
And for many of us, we're able to live lives that are separate from the dark side, right? So, in most cases, no one's dying outside our doors. We're not. Like I think about police officers, right? Police officers are face to face with the worst.
Yep.
Right. So someone gets murdered, they're the ones who see the body.
Yeah.
Most people in America don't see a dead body. Like that's not a thing that they would see.
Yeah.
And it does something to you when you do see it. It does something to you when you take a life too.
Oh yeah.
Right. So I think about like I was watching this police video where a cop went up to this woman's car and was just knocking on the window because she was facing the wrong way on the road, and he was like, "Ma'am, are you okay?" And he's trying to talk to her, and she eventually pulls out a gun.
Whoa.
And he has to shoot her because she's pointing the gun at him.
Yeah.
And he goes to the other car and he's talking to the people like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" Because I think a shot hit the windshield of a different car.
Oh wow.
And he's talking to them, and as he's talking to them, like you could tell, like he's like this. And when it came to that moment that he realized that everybody else was okay, he broke down and started crying. Like I think about that type of thing, like that aspect that most people are never, very fortunately, ever put in that type of situation. And because of that, people say some wild and stupid shit. So like when people who are gun nuts, for example, man, I wish someone would come on here.
I know.
And I was like, man, you don't talk about that's not. They think that they're Billy Badass Rambo.
Yeah,
Taking a life is some serious shit.
Don't do that to your soul.
Don't do that, man.
Unless you have to, obviously. But the dark, man, I think America is so divorced from death to the point where it's not healthy. Whether it's about big pharma keeping you alive forever or just the way funerals go about.
Or even just growing old.
Or just growing old, yeah. I mean, there's people out there who want you to die young. Like, what the hell is his name? The Chicago, Rahm Emanuel's brother. He wrote a whole op-ed in The Atlantic about why you should just die young.
That's dark as fuck.
Dude, you gotta find it. I'll find it. It's crazy. It's crazy. Like, he's like, don't take care of yourself. Just let yourself go. Because basically old people are bad for the population. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like what Paul Ehrlich would say.
That's some real communism stuff. Right?
Yeah, Paul Ehrlich also would say it. He wanted to fine people for having too many kids. This is in this country. And there's videos of him saying it, like, we should discourage families, like maybe have one or two, stuff like that. It's wild, but we are so far gone from understanding or being around death that it makes you feel like oddly invincible. Obviously you're not, right? Which is why, people go out of their way to say crazy stuff or road rage and stuff. I don't know what it is about. I think growing up on a farm, this is way different, but I understood death to a degree at a super young age because of a farm, right? You're burying your horse. My first funeral was at 1. I don't remember it, but that's when they started, right? And that's for animals, and it's different. But when you're digging a grave for something because you don't have a tractor to do it or whatever, the backhoe, and then you're walking your horse to that hole in the ground. It was just something that no one else at school was doing, and I was the only kid on a farm. So I go to school and they're like, "How was your weekend?" I'm like, I don't know. I had to put my horse down.
You were like a kid from Vietnam or something.
Totally. Yeah, I had this voice. I had this voice in 2nd grade. They're like, "Damn, what did you see?" I'm like, "Man, it's dark out there." The horror. But I have friends to this day who are our age, and they have yet to lose someone in their life. I've lost a lot of people, whether it's old age, accidents, suicide, death has been just so present in my life forever. I was with my grandfather as he was dying. Then and that week before that, I was with my wife's grandfather as he died. It's just crazy death. And I don't know what it is. I'm kind of comfortable around it, you know, like and not in an unhealthy way. Like maybe some people will be like, you know, okay, maybe you shouldn't be around death that much. And I do have my gothic tendencies from growing up, but like there's something about being with someone as they're dying that I don't know why, but it doesn't really bother me. Like I kind of like being there for that person, you know, playing the music they want to listen to. If they're not incapacitated, which my grandfather was. I don't know, it's weird. And like, so this is the same grandfather who I was saying was a cop in the city in the 70s. He would also tell me as a cop that he had a different dead body every day. Like he would just have to be called to a place where there was someone who was murdered by like a baseball bat and like he would tell me he started talking to dead bodies too. So this is the guy who told me why it's important to talk to the people. This is also the guy who would then talk to dead bodies, right?
That makes sense. You ever watch like old Law and Order?
Oh yeah.
And then the damn, I can't remember the guy's name.
Oh yeah, I never remember. I'm terrible.
I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
But they would always be like wise asses as the body's there.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, because they were probably cops in the 70s, and that shit doesn't faze them anymore.
Yo, seriously. I mean, his stories were so crazy. I spent 10 years recording interviews with him, like forever. The second I was old enough to realize like this man has crazy stories, I had to start recording. That was actually probably my first time interviewing anybody, like for real, because I wasn't doing it yet, publishing. So something so important about the story, like to no one else probably, but yeah, like it was fun. I was going to say this. He talked to those dead bodies, and then he retired as a cop. He hated being a cop. Like he kind of like how I'm talking about being an adjunct professor is like how he got treated as a cop by other cops, right? Or like the higher ups. Right. And it also just wore him down. Like he saw his buddy, his partner got shot and killed. Like he would have like ashtrays thrown out of the Roosevelt Hotel at him from like way up high. Crazy stories. He was also at the Beatles concert when people were passing out, you know, as a cop in the city. So, but anyway, fast forward. What does he do in Florida? And he's retired. He's a hearse driver. And what does he do in the hearse? He sings to the dead bodies. That's what he did. He had a beautiful voice, sort of like this one. I'm not saying mine's beautiful, but his singing voice was incredible. Like this crazy baritone singing voice that, you know, he'd sing like these old 40s like standards, and he'd just sing the dead bodies. So I guess that's like that's how I look at everything. Yeah. Even if they're dead, you can still talk to them.
You know what's interesting for me? I don't have I haven't had too much death in my life. Mm-hmm. A few. One of them I would say was impactful because it was just before my son was born, and I believe his mother was pregnant, and you know I was like 20, right? So it's like this, but seeing that, I think every time I go to a funeral, it makes me appreciate life. Mm-hmm. A little bit more.
Absolutely.
But just one story. So my great aunt, she was like my grandmother. Mm-hmm. My grandmother died when I was very young, and there was some family disconnect, anyways. So I don't remember my grandmother. Right. But my great aunt was like my grandmother, and we would go at least once a year. I want to say just before I was a teenager, maybe like I was like 10. Mm-hmm. And we would go every year for Thanksgiving, sometimes twice a year for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And they lived in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. So we drive from New York, or we were in New Jersey, and we drive to Massachusetts. And I just, like, she was always warm. Mm. She was always, like, welcoming. And you could bring anybody there. You know, she was very much so like the matriarch of the family.
Right.
At least like that's how I saw her.
Yeah, of course.
Everyone respected her. She was never a mean person, nothing like that. And she was always laughing. She was always joking. There was a gap in my adult years where I just think I had my own shit going on. Mm-hmm. And I kind of regret not doing that. Mm-hmm. But when I started coming back, like when I started dating my wife, one of the things that I did was I said, "You're coming with me for Thanksgiving. I want my family to meet you." Mm. And she was having some health issues. Mm-hmm. And I remember her being on oxygen, and she looked different.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, she's age is like catching up to her, and plus her health issues were catching up. But you know what she did? She was laughing, right? And she would crack a joke, or she would look at someone funny and then kind of laugh and giggle to herself. So she always had that positive spirit.
Yep.
And my cousins one day called me and said that like she's in hospice and they're going to take her out of hospice and bring her home. They don't know if she's going to make it. And when they told me that, I was like, this is it. Like, so I dropped everything I was doing. I went to go see her. When I got there, she was sedated and she woke up once and she was screaming.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, that's not her.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, it was terrible to watch.
Yep.
And, like, I just couldn't see her like that. Like, it really bothered me to see her in that much pain.
Yep.
And she went back under again. And I said, I'm going to go. I'm going to go home. Because I was there all day. And I said, I'm just going to drive back home. So I drove back home. The next morning, she passed away overnight. And so, like, that really spoke to me, her death, and seeing her in that state. But the crazy part was, like, that really hurt. Because it was like it was my grandmother.
Yeah.
And, excuse me, getting choked up.
Yeah, dude.
But here's the crazy part. The crazy part was the funeral was happening. I come up. My cousin, he's a pastor. He did, he did everything and he spoke. And I'm crying, but I'm trying to keep it in. I'm trying to keep it together. And they asked me, now, why am I losing my voice now?
It's West Virginia.
They asked me to be a pallbearer.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, okay. And it was, I don't know how to explain this other than, like, this is what happened. I'm barely keeping it together. I'm crying. Like, if you look at my eyes are red. And I'm crying. I feel incredibly sad. We get to the plot. They say their piece, pick up the casket, and I feel energy go through me. And we put her down. And from that moment, I stopped crying. Wow. And it was quite literally like someone said, everything's going to be okay. And from that moment, because I was actually saying, like, I'm going to do this, and then later that day, I'm going to go home. Yeah. So all the family gets back to the house and says, let's go to a movie. Let's do this. And I'm like, okay. And so we all went to see Black Panther, the first Black Panther. Oh, nice. Wow. Came out. So we all went to the movies. We came back, we were laughing, we were having a good time. I did not cry at all from that moment on. Wow. And it's one of those things where I even wrote about it in my book. As an example of someone who just accepted people for who they were, like my great aunt. Yeah. But death was always like something impactful for me. Because something would always happen when I was at someone's funeral, especially if it was a family member, that made me readjust how I saw life. Yeah. And readjust the importance of like my family or the importance of family in general. So, that's kind of my story. But,
that's a beautiful story. Yeah, no, I know how it is. Like you reminded me of my grandma passed away. This was the wife of the grandfather I'm telling you about. It was a similar kind of thing. I'm watching her pass away too, and waking up and going back, and it was just so bizarre. She knew she was dying. She'd already beaten breast cancer. Now she had leukemia. We had her move in with my family, like my wife and our kids, and now I'm like, wow. Every time she opens her eyes, it's like it's weird because she's like, it's almost like, am I dead? Like a really weird thing. And like, you're not going to say you're not dead, but like, it's just like this weird unspoken thing between you where it's like, no, you're still here. We're still together. And it's why I think like Rahm Emanuel's brother is so fucking evil. Because like, not having old people around is insane, right? They've got the stories. They lived like the joy you're talking about and the acceptance you're talking about with your aunt. Like, my grandma was very similar. She saw crazy shit in her life, right? Like, first of all, her parents fled the pogroms in Russia. They came over here and then started a life in Brooklyn. And then, they grew up to basically inherit World War II, Vietnam, a bunch of assassinations, all while raising kids. And somehow she never, like, got like doom obsessed. Like she was always hopeful, always so like she was the quintessential grandma. My dad's mom was not. This lady was very different. You know, like she's like your typical just like Irish woman in a pencil skirt who lived to 99 somehow or something, like 98. Lovely woman, but just there was no warmth, right? Like my mom's mom was just like extremely kind and loving and cared. So like that presence leaving Earth is crazy to think about, like that, like what you're saying too, you know, that kind of love. And I think of her all the time because first of all, I try to maintain that hope despite all the bullshit, right? Because I want to be that old person who, like, I'm aware of the doom. Obviously there's doom. We had doom in our generations.
Right.
There's going to be doom for the next one, right? This lady went through everything. Her husband went to war. Then he came back and saw a dead body every day, right? They made it somehow. You're going to make it. Like, that perseverance is so beautiful to me. And like, we've lost the ability to even believe in that perseverance because everyone's a victim, right? And that is like a new economy right now, which is so divorced from that world that we're talking about, the older people. And I'm also so glad that my kids got to know their great grandma, which is, I didn't know my great grandparents, but like they had that connection to history. My daughter wouldn't, well, I don't think she'll remember it. She won't, she was too young, but like my son remembers her to this day, you know? And they had a relationship. And that's a lot of time, like meeting, right? Well, for him, it's just a few years, but through her, he has access to all this time and he would listen to them, right? Man, like I cried just thinking about like, listen to them have breakfast in the morning in our house and just like her telling him stories. I'm like, it's amazing, right? And like for someone to say that there should be no old people, you're insane, right? Because like that, talking about stories as well, they're the storytellers. They lived through all this stuff, whether they're writing it or not. Like they will tell you these stories that you need to hear, right? Because maybe those exact events aren't happening, but it's kind of, we live in like these cycles. You know, the same shit is kind of always happening. Yeah. The race stuff, the class stuff, the political stuff, the tyrants, the war, like it's just constant bullshit. We're like stuck in this doom loop. So yeah, I think of like, they got through it, we'll get through it. Yeah. You have to. You can't give up.
I mean, this is what happens when you have no like political, I don't want to say relevance, but political understanding, especially like history. Like people think what's happening right now, I'm not saying it's good. Yeah. Like trying to indict Trump over this nonsense. Yeah. It's not good. Right. But my God, we watch assassinations happen. People were alive when that was happening. Still, like that was a thing. Yeah. And yet we're still here.
We're still here, dude. People on TV watch JFK get his skull blown off, and only like 60 years prior, 60 something years prior, McKinley was shot, right? Like, and then in between that, no, maybe Cleveland was before that, but like, that's not a long amount of time though between McKinley and JFK. Right. To us, it feels that way because that's like double our life. Right. But when we're 60, this is going to feel like yesterday, right? So it's unfortunate that this keeps happening, but evil is just always out there, and you got to like recognize it, do your best to battle it, teach your kids how to battle it, how to recognize it, and like that immune system of ideas, like we were talking about earlier, like you got to instill that in the kids somehow. The colleges aren't doing it. Yeah, like, definitely. They want to actually destroy that. They want to do the intellectual vaccine of that. like we want to take that away from you somehow, which is also evil. And like, you know, like, yeah, the colleges are so deranged. But somehow, you know, if you raise the kids right, that's the only hope I think the future has. It's like you got to get the next generation prepared, because this generation, I mean, we're not all fucked up, but you know, there's a lot of us that are pretty fucked up.
I mean, I think every generation has some sort of unique problem.
Oh, totally.
But I think that's where it's like when I tell people to go outside. The reason I say they need to go outside is because you need some sort of balance. Yeah. Like what's happening in politics is, yes, it's happening, but that's part of the equation. The other part is go the fuck outside and be a part of the world. Right. And much like history, like the things that are bad that are happening right now, yes. But I mean, I'd rather have what's happening now than like what was happening in the 70s.
Of course, yeah.
Or the 60s.
And it's funny, you just reminded me of like this story I wrote just the other day. I published just the other day. I pretty much wrote it because I needed a palate cleanser. Like I've been so invested in like, I'll dive pretty deep into my paranoid brain, which isn't, I don't have to go that deep to get there. It's there pretty easily, right? Or just like politics or whatever. I was like, I need something else. And it kind of goes with the going outside thing, right? I'm like, and this is so funny because it's like, Twitter's like, if you want to like perform for that algorithm, you got to talk politics. You know, if you're a thirst trap, share that video. You share some stank memes. Meanwhile, I'm like, I'm going to write about 5 pages about a guy who fishes for lobsters.